I thank you for joining me today to learn more about the Forest Corps Fund, particularly with the focus on community-supported conservation. The Virginia Outdoors Foundation is a public organization. It was created in 1966 through an act of the General Assembly and is codified in the state code. VOF is a leader in land conservation. Currently, we have nearly 850,000 acres protected, and these are across 111 counties and independent cities. We are the largest easement holder in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. If you look at the VOF mission statement, it is quite broad. You can read here that VOF was established to promote the preservation of open space lands and to encourage private gifts of money, securities, land, or other property to preserve the natural, scenic, historic, scientific, open space, and recreational areas of the Commonwealth. So that is one very broad mission and very broad goals. Historically, VOF has done a lot of work holding easements on private land, but as we move forward and change to modern times, we are diversifying our work, focusing more on public access and making spaces available for the public, not just protecting private land, though that work is still of critical importance. Today, we'll be talking about the Forest Corps Fund, and this is a grant program administered through VOF. Before I talk about the program, I'd like to tell you a little bit of background about why the program exists and where the funding for the program came from. When we started the Forest Corps Fund, it was always with the extra note that this was the Mountain Valley Pipeline region. VOF had developed the Forest Corps Fund to focus both on the Mountain Valley Pipeline region and to make grant funding available in the Atlantic Coast Pipeline area. We learned earlier this year that Atlantic Coast Pipeline will not be moving forward, so this Mountain Valley Pipeline grant program is our one and only area of work in the Forest Corps Fund. As I would guess that a lot of you already know, some facts about the Mountain Valley Pipeline are that it's 303 miles long, it cuts through 6 counties in Virginia, and during construction, there's a 125-foot temporary right-of-way, and once the pipeline is installed and the area is all stabilized, there'll be a 50-foot permanent right-of-way. I will point out that work on this pipeline has been stopped for quite some time, and the reports that you hear about how much of the pipeline has been completed does seem to depend on the person to whom you're speaking and the intent of the material provided. For this grant program, our funding is tied to the amount of clearing and grubbing that has been completed. The number that we have been provided from the pipeline company is 74% of clearing and grubbing being done. I do hear a range of numbers depending on to whom I'm speaking. So when the Commonwealth was considering the Mountain Valley Pipeline and we were learning that it was going to come through the state under Governor McAuliffe, a group of agencies and nonprofits got together to look at the impact that this pipeline was going to have, in specific on water quality and forests in Virginia. So this group got together and formed the Virginia Forest Conservation Partnership with members from DEQ, Department of Conservation and Recreation Natural Heritage, Department of Forestry, Game and Inland Fisheries, Nature Conservancy, and the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. And they were looking at the impact of this pipeline that was outside of the standard permitting process, losses that may not be mitigated for otherwise. And that really boiled down to looking at forest fragmentation and ecosystem services lost and interior habitat lost. Well, what does that mean when we talk about forest fragmentation? I include a kind of meaty slide here to delve into what exactly are ecosystem services and why they matter, as well as why it matters to protect interior habitat. The bottom line is large tracts of high quality forest provide a lot more benefit than the same area of forest parceled out over space. In addition, there are a lot of unique species that are very precious that require interior habitat. They can't live in the edge habitat. And to to have that is absolutely necessary to have large acreage tracts. You can't have it in these patches. So when we're evaluating the impacts of forest fragmentation, these are two of the big drivers for needing mitigation work. So again, the impacts of the pipeline were considered in the NEPA process. That's the National Environmental Review that's required. And this forest fragmentation and the additional water quality impacts are areas that fall out. Oops, excuse me, let me slide on back. Oh, I mean slide forward, pardon me. Those do fall outside of the standard process. And we are starting to see this more and more in the environmental permitting world. For those of you maybe who have been paying attention around the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, that's another place where the state stepped up and required mitigation that wasn't going to be required on a federal level. So new uncharted waters. Moving forward, after the assessment had been completed on the pipeline showing the forest fragmentation impacts, that group of forest conservation partners came up with a number, and the Commonwealth of Virginia took that number to the pipeline companies to negotiate and came up with a memorandum of agreement for funding to be paid to work toward offsetting some of those impacts of the pipeline. There were several mitigation partners named in this memorandum for addressing forest fragmentation. There were two partners, Virginia Outdoors Foundation, who received $15 million, and a U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, who received $5 million. On the water quality side, the Virginia Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts received $3.85 million, and Virginia Environmental Endowment received $3 million. To date, it's my understanding that the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities is still shaping their program. VEE did their first grant round and announced awards early spring. So their area of work is slightly different than ours, both in subject matter and in geographic area, but they're moving forward funding projects to improve water quality in the Mountain Valley Pipeline area. So when we talk about these memorandums of agreement, there's actually two layers of agreements going on here. The first broader agreement is between the Commonwealth of Virginia and the Mountain Valley Pipeline Company. The second layer of mitigation agreements is between the Commonwealth of Virginia and the mitigation partners, and I will briefly speak to both of those. These memorandums of agreement give us our guidelines for the program, criteria for projects, and the agreement between the Commonwealth and the mitigation partners is more specific than that between the Commonwealth and the pipeline company. Between the pipeline company and the Commonwealth of Virginia, there's outlined that it should be a comprehensive approach for compensatory mitigation that is at least commensurate with the project's impacts. The agreement establishes commitments related to forest conservation based on the impacts of fragmentation, and that this program will be rolled out in consultation with the state agencies that have expertise in the appropriate areas, and the work would be done in a timely manner. When we talk about mitigation, you would actually hope to have protected land before or at the time of impact. So we've been on a fast track trying to get forest land protected to try to offset some of those impacts from the pipeline. To move forward, other than those program guidelines, to get into the project criteria, that's in this MOU between the pipeline company and the state of Virginia. It says that projects must be designed to address the impacts on forested land. They must be located in a reasonable proximity. They must achieve durable restoration, and they must be in addition to any already planned project or action. There's still a lot of room to dial down on what those terms actually mean, so we'll get into those later. Moving forward, focusing on the agreement between the Commonwealth of Virginia and the Virginia Outdoors Foundation, we get into a little bit more of the specifics, and we get some of the values of the Virginia Outdoors Foundation worked into our agreement on what we're looking for in these projects. The agreement between the Commonwealth and the pipeline company was very science-driven and research-driven, whereas the agreement between the Commonwealth and Virginia Outdoors Foundation is a little broader and takes into consideration the citizens of the Commonwealth who might benefit from this funding and these programs. So within this agreement, we get a little more information that we should prioritize projects based on those that offer public access, those that are building off of existing areas, making those parks and recreational areas larger, those projects that protect viewsheds. We should be focusing on projects that support local and regional comprehensive plans, or that address a need in the outdoors plan or the natural heritage plan. So we get a little more guidance in where we should be working and how to get our work done. And so here, with that input, we arrive at the development of the Forest Core Fund, and CORE stands for Community Opportunities for Restoration and Enhancement. The framework, going back to those memorandums of agreement, is that we're going to mitigate forest fragmentation through avoided deforestation, establishment of new forest, and restoration and enhancement of forested land. Well, how the heck are we going to do that? First, let's look at the funding. As we discussed earlier, Virginia Outdoors Foundation, as a mitigation partner, was awarded $15 million for this work. And it is VOF's intent to fully fund mitigation at the earliest stage of clearing and grubbing activities, because once those trees are cut, that is habitat lost and a resource lost. But to be responsible with our funding, we have to keep in mind that that clearing and grubbing is what releases our funding. So we have to stay in touch with the pipeline company to find out how much funds we can release into the world without ever having to worry about them being clawed back. Now, in June of 2020, the pipeline companies are reporting 74% of clearing and grubbing. An interesting case in point is that when I was preparing this presentation in 2019 in June, clearing and grubbing was at 70%. So that's an interesting frame of reference. But looking to what VOF has done in the past, we allocated $3.7 million in 2018 and $3.8 in 2019. To stay below that 74%, we're doing the smaller grant round this year of $1 million. It's a bit of a pilot program to test community-supported conservation concept in general. And if it goes well, which I am hoping that it will, this framework will be incorporated into future grant rounds as a funded, dedicated funding source in Forest Core just for these community projects. So to take a quick glimpse at what we did in 2018, here's a chart of the projects that were selected by the Board of Trustees of VOF for funding. You can see we were able to protect just over 2,000 acres for that $3.7 million. Moving along to 2018, you'll see similar numbers. We were able to protect just over 3,000 acres at $3.6 million. So there's been an incredible amount of good work and pristine, high quality forest that has been protected. But when we gathered our team of experts together to improve our materials and shape the next year's program, we all had the same thought, that something was still missing. We were checking all the boxes about protecting high ecological integrity, but we were not necessarily serving impacted communities other than protecting the forest that provides an ecosystem service. So what was missing? Those projects that hold community significance. This photo is one I took from the blog 100 Days, 100 Voices by Nancy Andrews. And this is a group of kids in Newport where the pipeline is passing through directly. This is Mayapple School, which has been forced to relocate to Blacksburg due to the pipeline proximity. So while VOF has protected a large amount of high quality forest, we haven't done a ton of projects or haven't been able to fund a lot of projects that really hit on what is significant to the people in this area. So looking forward, that's where we wanted to spend our time and really drill down on this concept. And if you see this quote on your slide underneath this visual from one of our projects from 2018 in Pittsylvania County at Wayside Park, you'll see that VOF was instructed that a prioritization on lands that will be provided, that will provide public access and where forest land preservation is essential to the public benefit that will be derived from the property was a directive right there from the Commonwealth. And we felt we had not been able to accomplish that to date. So we wanted to look for those projects like this one you're seeing the representation of, which is a park that needed a great deal of renovation and trail work in Pennsylvania County, where the Forest Corps Fund put an easement on the forested part of the park so those trees would never be cut or harvested. Pennsylvania County Parks and Rec was able to use that purchase of timber harvesting rights, the funds from that, to put it into infrastructure and renovation in the park. So that was an awesome use, an awesome creative use at that time of funds. In addition, we've seen some great projects that have community significance come from Roanoke County, both trying to get something off the ground in Explore Park to fill in some spots there, and Reed Mountain, which I know has gotten a lot of very positive coverage. So we're super excited to fund projects like that. And the purpose of this grant round this year and this presentation is to find more of those. So what have we done to our program to try to bring in those projects with greater community significance? Well, the thought process was as such. When we sat down and started thinking about and looking at what projects we'd funded, we recognized the ecological significance, those pristine tracts of forest, don't always align with those places that the community really gets out and enjoys. There might be steep slopes, there might be endangered species. Those beautiful old forests might not be the best place to have the community traipsing around. So we recognize those two goals may not be compatible. We recognize that we've done great work and protected a large amount of pristine forest. And now it's time to focus on the people in the area, getting great public access, and bringing in an education component where possible. Another awesome example where this has succeeded in the Forest Corps Fund is at Brush Mountain, and New River Land Trust has done an incredible job, not just putting forward the project, but getting trail work done, bringing the public into the planning stages and implementation, as well as now bringing attention of the public to this awesome resource that they have made available partially using Forest Corps funds. So again, we're just looking for more projects like that coming from a local level and trying to get input and ideas and proposals from the folks we haven't reached yet. So moving forward with those basic tenets in mind, here's our timeline. Our Board of Trustees was excited to approve this form of the program in late June. We announced the request for proposals in early July, and today we're having this great webinar. Looking forward, November 20th is the deadline for project proposals. I know it has been a little bit drawn out, but we wanted to have, in these interesting and different times, we wanted to be able to do adequate outreach, give folks time to develop projects, and try to build partnerships even though we're not able to meet and talk in person. Following the submission of those project proposals on November 20th, we will have our technical committee meeting January 27th. That's our panel of agency experts who reviews applications and scores applications. March 3rd, our Board of Trustees panel, the Special Forestry Committee, will meet to look at the recommendations of the technical committee, as well as their scoring and the applications that were submitted. And then we will announce the grant awards on April 8th of next year. So there's the structure, there's the time frame for what you can expect moving forward. Now I'm going to delve into more of grant administration. Some of this we have already discussed a little through the course of this presentation, but to repeat, we've got the 15 million total allocation. We want to get as much money out there to protect as much land as possible, as soon as possible, And currently with 74% completed, we can make $1 million available for this grant round. This year we've got a change. We are capping applications at 200,000. In the past, we have funded projects even all the way to $1 million per application. But this year we wanted to bring out those smaller proposals, try to give more folks an opportunity, and really not base our evaluation so heavily on large acreage. So we thought more could be done with less. Again, in order to try to really support smaller groups, we're not requiring any match. You can use 100% Forest Corps funds to fully fund a project, though we'd love to see match if it can happen. And we're also including funding for administrative costs. We recognize that it takes staff time and staff need to be paid. So we want to work that right in up front and let people know that up to 10% of their budget for these grant projects can be used for staff and administrative costs. Again, we're trying to balance the goals of this program and fund those projects that are ecologically significant as well as community supported, but we recognize that those two things don't always work well together. And if we look overall at what we've done, it's time to really focus on these community supported projects to get a more balanced representation of the work we want to do in this area. So what type of work are we funding? Well, here are eligible activities. In our grant speak and memorandum of agreement speak, it's avoided deforestation, afforestation, and restoration. In translation, that means there's funding available for easements, for fee simple acquisition, for the purchase of someone's timber harvesting rights. We can cover the costs of tree planting. We can cover the cost of conversion from a monoculture to a native species. And we can help with the costs of invasive exotic controls, perhaps controlled burns. And new for this community supported grant round, we are also including enhancements to facilitate public access and recreational use, whether that's trail work, signage, benches. If you can make an argument for how it's going to get people out into forest and appreciating forest, we will consider it. In addition, I want to point out that we will also cover the costs of planning, whether that's design work, site planning, community meetings, development of master plans. All of those are eligible components of projects that we will consider. What changes have we made to who's eligible? Well, again, we're trying to look locally. We're trying to figure out what projects these communities want and have members of these communities bring these projects forward. And to best enable that to happen, we actually took out federal and state agencies as eligible applicants. We'd love to see applications coming from localities, public bodies, soil and water conservation districts, park authorities, tribal groups, planning district commissions, registered nonprofits, churches, outdoor education groups, the like. We would love to see projects put forward from a local voice. And where are these local voices coming from? This is another change we've made this year to really drill down and try and do some work that is significant to these impacted areas. We have shrunk the eligible area of work down to the 6 counties and the independent cities and towns contained within their borders. So you'll remember initially from the Memorandum of Agreement, the language that was provided was that work needed to be done within a reasonable proximity, and that was open for interpretation. In our first 2 grant rounds, which had a very heavy weight on ecological significance, we looked at ecoregions and we evaluated a couple different buffering distances from that pipeline impact, and we had an area of work that was much greater. We allowed applications for any project within counties that had land that was 50 miles or less to the pipeline. So it was a much larger area of work. So this year we're shrinking down these community supported area so folks who have been impacted by the pipeline are much more likely to get that funding and see projects that they can appreciate, and enjoy. So even though that forest and land that we protected that no one may ever set a foot on is very, very significant in the state, our focus is a little different this year. What are the requirements that are still in place? Well, if you're using Forest Corps funding to protect a forest, it's got to have permanent protection, and there are going to be timber harvesting restrictions. What does that look like specifically? Well, land that is funded through this program must be dedicated to open space, either placed under an easement held by a public body or through the use of deed restrictions. We need to know that that forest is going to be forest forever. And that takes shape of this forest management provision, which is required as each part of a project funded by the Forest Corps Fund. And while I don't expect you to soak all of this up, this material is available on our website. This is our language that we developed with input from the Forest Conservation Partnership as well as the Secretary of Natural Resources Office. So there are very few exceptions for why trees can be cut on land that has been paid for through the Forest Corps Fund. And rather than read them to you, I'm just going to move along. The intent of this language and the program is to maintain forest, to always be healthy forest. What are other additional grant requirements? Well, when you're putting together your proposals and thinking of concepts you'd like to submit either for this grant round or a future grant round, proposals are required to be project specific. And for these new community supported projects, they must show a demonstrated connection to forest and forested properties. That's phrased a little differently, and what you may not be reading but you will be hearing is that land doesn't actually have to be forested to be eligible. You just need to justify your proposal and show its connection to forest and forested land. We're going to require that to be considered for funding, there must be a high level of community support. We'll get into where that can be shown as we talk about the application later in this presentation. And a very bare bones requirement is that the land has got to be open to the public, and we want to see projects that are enhancing public access. And of course, you'll recall all of these proposals must be within that highlighted area of impact for the community supported program, those 6 counties, the towns and cities within them, as well as the independent towns and cities within that boundary. So those are the grant requirements. What are some eligible costs that can be considered in your proposal? The following are considered eligible costs: due diligence, things like surveys, title reports, appraisals, legal services. Site prep and maintenance, absolutely. Again, I'll point out that we want to be able to support small groups, nonprofits, so we are certainly willing to cover up to 10% of the proposal can be administrative costs, staff time, overhead, whatever needs to be done to get these projects moving forward and good work on the ground. Questions I hear about eligible costs in the past few years, excuse me, I got a little excited and clicked too far. Questions I've heard in the past years are about open land and buildings. Can we use Forest Corps funds to buy open land? Can we use it to buy buildings? And the historic answer from the past 2 years has been, well, the goal of the program is to maximize acres of forest protections. This year, it's a little more nuanced. You heard me say a couple minutes ago that we could even fund land that wasn't forested. So we're being intentionally open this year. If you've got an idea, if it's on open land, if you want to buy a piece that's next to a forest and have that be a trailhead, a river access, if you have partner funding and can, within the budget of the Forest Corps proposal, make a go of an education center that would show the importance and function of forest, make a pitch, justify your request, tell us your story and show how strong it is, and we can consider it. We're intentionally being open. because we want to allow for those ideas we haven't thought of yet, stuff coming from the community. All right, looking forward to eligible match. Again, we are not requiring match, but it is encouraged if you can come up with it. Eligible match is considered in-kind contributions, grant funds from other entities, a donation of a portion of the value of an easement or fee title being acquired with these grant funds, or even permanent protection of property that's currently owned. So those are all considered eligible and, again, not required. So getting into what you need to turn in with your grant application to be considered. What are the required components? And this is a change for 2020. Again, I'm trying to simplify the process. We don't want anyone to not participate because it seems intimidating. We're trying to level the playing field between the smaller groups and the larger applicants who might even have, you know, a whole GIS department to help them with their work. We're trying to make it easier for these projects to move forward from a local source. And you'll see the list has been greatly reduced for what is considered required rather than requested, and I'll run through all of them. Obviously, we would hope to get a completed application with a robust narrative and a plan of work. We want to know what you want to do and how you intend to get it done. We'd like to see maps so we can figure out where your property is and see how it all fits together. Another important component is the completed budget form. That is a separate form from the application, and I did try to make it a little more user-friendly in that there are certain boxes that will do the math and total up the numbers you enter in the specific categories. Again, I would just emphasize that it is my job to help you with these applications, so if anything's giving you trouble, please be in touch and I will try to help you work through it. Again, anywhere you're confused on an application, in addition to reaching out, just do your best, make your best argument, focus on why that forested area is significant, focus on how you're addressing the education requirements, and really try to promote the community support that you have garnered for this proposal. So what are some requested components outside of these required components? If you've got the abilities, we'd love to get a GIS shapefile for your parcel. We'd love to see a letter. If you're buying the land or buying an easement, we'd love to see a letter from the landowner saying, yes, this is something I'd like to do. If you're proposing the purchase of an easement, remember we need a public entity who will hold or co-hold the easement. If you can get a letter signing on that you've got that support, that helps VOF know that your project is ready to move forward and has good viability. If you have it, a substantiation of the value of the property or the easement is great. I would not encourage you to spend any money in order to garner this material to put your project application together. So use the resources that are available to you, knowing that if you're not funded, you wouldn't be reimbursed. So make your best estimate. Moving on to the next level is, if you can come up with an estimate of the timber value, that has been very helpful. We learned early on that a timber appraisal, that determining the forfeiture of timber harvesting is a new area of work for us. And in some cases, our estimates were very high and other times they were very low. So if you can get a professional opinion on those numbers, it will greatly help you submit a strong budget. And let you know what funding you really need to get the full value of those trees. Additional items that are just gravy that I'm not asking for someone to go out and spend money on up front would be appraisals, title reports, surveys, environmental site assessment, any of that. If you've got it, this is a project you've already got grant funding for or you're in the process of, turn all that stuff in because it's very useful, and again comes back to the concept that we know this project is well underway and is very viable, but please don't go out and spend money that you may not be reimbursed on getting these items. Other material that would help support your application but is not required are those letters of support. We're really, really looking for the significance of projects to communities. So we would love to see letters from your locality, letters from the Board of Supervisors, letters from the planning district, but also even more local than that, maybe from individuals, maybe from nonprofit groups that do education or work on getting people out on the land. Any community support that you can document, be sure to include it. We'd love to see photographs. That saying is true. A picture tells 1,000 words. Please, please send them in. If you can, you know, you don't have to send in your W-9 up front. That can always wait until you know you've been awarded a grant fund. But do send us your information so we know if you're applying as a nonprofit that you've got tax exempt status. And please do share with us any financial information that can help support that your organization will be able to uphold the terms of the grant agreement. The first year, I've learned from the first year to request a link to a website rather than having somebody have to send in their entire financial report. So again, if you've got questions on what I'm looking for or what we'd like to see, be in touch. That's why I'm here. How do we want to see these grant applications sent in? In a time where we'd like to save paper and also be responsive to the scares of COVID, we have switched, last year we switched to a digital submission. The process that we have in place is that if you know you want to submit your material, you contact me and I will send you a link to an online Dropbox for your material. You can upload your material right into this box. You can edit and replace material. So you can come in and replace, if you put in an application and you find a typo, you can upload a corrected version until our deadline of 4 o'clock, November 20th. That's when you get cut off. If you have trouble with internet connection, if you need to submit something on paper, we will work with you. Just get in touch. In putting together your grant application, what resources are available other than me? Well, here is information to link you up with GIS data from the Department of Forestry. If you're a mapper, if you love getting on the computer and seeing the qualities of a particular parcel, they do have downloadable information. In addition, you have local and regional foresters who will be glad to help you interpret that data and talk about the forest that is on your land. We have the Department of Conservation and Recreation's Division of Natural Heritage, and these folks are passionate about the natural world and the species out there on your land. There's a great mapping tool called the Natural Heritage Data Explorer for you to use. That's for anyone. You just have to go to that website that is listed there, and you can zoom around and see all sorts of data about what is on your property that you're proposing to strengthen your grant application. When we talk about view sheds and recreational needs, this is also through Department of Conservation and Recreation, and this time we're talking about the Division of Recreational Planning. Here you can hop on and find data on scenic rivers, scenic byways, scenic resources, as well as looking at recreational needs. Again, that Natural Heritage Data Viewer has recreational models built in. You just need a little bit of time to play with it and find it. And I'm happy to help you with that. Or there's Department of Conservation and Recreation staff who can help you as well. So we're out there, you just have to ask. In addition, if you want to look at what endangered or threatened species or special habitat may be on your land to strengthen this application, here are some links for the Game and Inland Fisheries folks who are now Department of, gosh, I can't even remember what the right name is, and because you're all on mute, no one can help me. They have a name change, but I'm sure this link on my slide will still direct you to the right place. And again, you can look at threatened and endangered species, look at habitat, find that wildlife action plan. Finally, thank you for the tip from our Director of IT, Dave Morton. It's Department of Wildlife Resources. Thank you very much for being on top of that, Dave. Moving forward to a newer area and a little bit less of the natural resource discussion for your grant application is this topic of environmental justice and trying to do work in areas that may have otherwise been overlooked. And what we have been using to date is a model system created through the Environmental Protection Agency called EJ Screen. This is an amazing model with amazing capabilities, but it definitely can be a little intimidating. The Environmental Justice Index summarizes environmental indicators and demographics and how the two come together. You can put in a pinpoint, you can put in an address, you can create an area of interest with a polygon, and this tool will tell you about demographics like what minority numbers, low income population numbers. It'll give you information about health statistics, education facts, and it also goes a step further, which is really what makes this tool stand out, to talk about environmental quality issues. It talks about air quality, water quality, proximity to Superfund sites and hazardous waste. A feature of this tool that I really think is great is that it also gives you a frame of reference. It will give you a chart that you can compare with your project site with the region as well as the nation to see how the people in the area you're proposing a project compare in environmental justice factors to across the nation. So that frame of reference is very, very useful. I would encourage you to check out this tool, and they have lots of help tutorial videos that you can work through. And again, I'm available to work through it with you together. So finally, I've driven that home here in my cute live audience, saying they're also available to help and chew things up as needed. But some of you I have worked with in the past, some of you I'm working with currently. I'm happy to look at your applications. I would encourage you, if you have any questions, to be in touch. It's not just me at Virginia Outdoors Foundation who's there to help. We have offices across the state, and our staff, regional staff, is available. If you don't know who covers your area or who to ask, you can hop on our website or you can come right to me. And this I would like to offer Virginia Outdoors Foundation as a resource, not just for these particular projects and filling out this application for this year, but we would love to talk to you about bigger ideas, future ideas. We'd love to try to help you if you don't feel like you have the capacity to pull off a project on your own, to find a partner. We're really just trying to help bring these projects forward from a local level. And again, we're looking to incorporate this framework, these criteria, and this dedicated funding source in future grant rounds. So use us, we're here, we love hearing about your ideas. We'd love to help you connect with other partners. But for this particular year, I'll move on to discussing scoring and review of applications once they're submitted. Scoring criteria. Applications that are submitted are going to be scored on primary and secondary criteria. Primary criteria are given a little more weight, so these are points you want to make sure you drive home in your application. We're going to evaluate and look for the fact that your project has a beneficial impact to and provides access for underserved communities. We're going to give points to those projects that show a large significance of their forested area and how it matters to a community. We're going to be looking for showings of community support, those letters of support, community meetings, however you feel you can best show it. We want to see it. We're requiring an educational component, so please be sure to answer that question and elaborate on that. And we're also giving points for those projects that are in closer proximity to the pipeline. So you have to be within the area of eligibility, but then we're also really looking to do work as close to that impact as possible. What are some secondary criteria? Well, we want to see alignment with plans, whether that's the local comprehensive plan, a regional recreational plan. We're going to be looking for that. So provide that support information. Like everything else, water is part of the equation. We want to give priority to those projects that are within an impacted watershed. If we're protecting a forest, we're improving or maintaining water quality. We are going to be looking at acreage, but it won't be as seriously weighted as it has in the ecologically driven grant rounds. Same with looking at your planned restoration and enhancement activities. We want to know, and we will give priority to those projects that protect a significant view shed. For those projects that leverage partner funding, though match is not required. And then the last point that we're going to look at is trying to create a geographic diversity and equitable distribution of funding across the impacted communities. There are still communities where we have not been able to reach or fund projects. So we're hoping that this outreach and this easier to use application brings some of those forward. So those are the criteria on which projects will be reviewed, and that comes to life in the scoring sheet. The scoring sheet is a resource to you in completing your application because you can see those points that the technical committee and the special forestry committee will be looking at when they are ranking your projects. This scoring sheet takes all of those criteria and assigns them a numerical value. So I would strongly encourage you to look at those criteria, look at how they are weighted, and make sure that your proposal drives home all of the points in a way that they can be captured by those reading it and scoring it. I don't delve into a whole lot of detail on the score sheet here, but again, I will say a lot of this application is qualitative, and that is your chance to make a good argument. This application process is more open than it ever has been. It's allowing for creativity and flexibility in a way that it never has in the past. Just make your pitch. Tell us what's unique. Answer all the questions on the form to the best of your ability, and keep that scoring sheet in the back of your mind when you do so. Forgive me, I zoomed ahead. All right, so that's my pep talk on completing the application and how to make your best sales pitch. Who are the folks you're making the sales pitch to? Well, it's not me. I wish it were. I'd give you all funding right away. But here are the folks you need to make your case to. The first line of review does happen at the staff level, but that is simply to check for completeness. I'll review your application and make sure we have the information that we need to review and score your proposal. I'm going to look for completeness, and I'm also going to look for accuracy. And if you're providing data about miles from the pipeline or being in an impacted watershed, that's something I'm going to double check. You may hear from me in this time after you submit your application to ask for clarification on some of your answers or to double check some facts. So we may be in touch. I'm preparing these applications and checking these applications to send to the technical committee. The technical committee has one representative from the following agencies. We have a representative from DCR Natural Heritage. There's a Virginia Outdoors Foundation staff person. We have a representative from Game and Inland Fisheries. We have an advisor as an environmental justice advisor from DEQ. And we have an expert from Department of Forestry, and those folks are all scoring your grant applications. These folks sit down and look at the quantitative qualities, but this year they're also going to be doing a great deal of discussion on the qualitative qualities, those things we can't put a number on. This technical committee will meet. Each representative of those agencies will have scored your projects, and we compare them, we discuss how they were scored, and they are going to make recommendations to the VOF Special Forestry Committee. We have found in years past that there have been questions on partial funding, and we have needed to go back from the technical committee review to applicants to discuss if a project is viable at a lower than 100% funding rate. I will be doing that as quickly as possible following the technical committee meeting to give applicants the opportunity to explain if their project would be viable at a reduced rate of funding or what components might be changed. Those recommendations will be considered, and the recommendation of the technical committee goes on again to the Virginia Outdoors Foundation Special Forestry Committee, which is made up of 2 of our Board of Trustees, and I am the staff liaison for that committee. They rely very heavily on the recommendations of the technical committee, though they do review applications and score applications themselves. Sometimes they're able to take into consideration a larger pool of considerations, again, getting into that regional equitable distribution of funds, looking at public benefit, looking at community significance and community impact. So they kind of take a step back, broader view, but have the support of the technical committee's recommendations. So that's our scoring and review process until it goes on to the full board of the trustees. And this is a 7-member board. They're governor appointed, and they get all of those recommendations and the report from the Special Forestry Committee. At the Board of Trustees meeting, they do have copies of all your applications, which they have reviewed, but they again rely heavily on those experts, on those folks who have met and reviewed and scored these projects to make the best recommendation. At the Board of Trustees meeting, these applications are reviewed, evaluated, and then the full board does the approving of funding for those projects. So again, there's often discussion on the qualitative components of the application, those that the scoring criteria cannot capture. But the Board of Trustees has the final say, and they're the folks who approve funding for projects. Should your project be funded, the following items would be required. We need an appraisal within 6 months of closing to support the funding that is being put towards your project. We need an ALTA survey. There's some flexibility on this for easements, but not for fee simple acquisition. If it's an acquisition project, it has to meet ALTA standards. I have a list of which ALTA standards are required, so I can provide that to you. This is an added cost, but it is covered completely by the grant. So please do your research on what it might cost when you're performing your budget work. Again, in order for grant funds to be dispersed for approved projects, we're going to need the phase 1 site assessment. You're going to need a commitment for title insurance and clear title. We're going to need the final deed language so we can make sure that forest management provision is in there. And we want to see a forest management plan. Again, this would only be relevant if there's forest on your land. We want to see the forest management plan is in alignment with that forest management provision. So this is if you get all the way through the finish line, it's April of 2021 and you've been funded, this is what's going to be required of you. So now that we've got all that fleshed out, where can you go back to hear this all again? We have the maps, the manual, and other resource material, including those lovely memorandums of agreement for your reading pleasure on the VOF website, all under the TERRA program, and more specifically, the Forest Corps Fund MVP region. So this is another spot that you can go to find resource material, the application, the budget forms, maps, all that good stuff, including this presentation at a minimum as a PDF, potentially as a recording, though I can't imagine you would want to watch this again. In conclusion, I'll hit on our changes for this year. We're trying to be open. We're trying to be flexible. We're not being driven completely by the ecological features of your proposal. But if you can find a spot that is ecologically fantastic and has community support and the community is able to get out and enjoy that property, that's amazing. We'd love to fund that project. We've worked in more flexibility to add funding for infrastructure, planning. Land doesn't necessarily even have to be forested. Make us the argument, show the community support. We're open, be creative, we're flexible. We can fund 100% of a project. We're not requiring match. We've got that 10% built in for administration, and we've really extended the time frame for the application submission to allow you time to not only develop the proposal, but develop the partnerships you need to succeed. So that's my pitch. I'm always available to you. I can help you find resources, and I am now ready to move to our interactive portion of this presentation with a question and answer. Again, we're going to handle that by using the raise your hand function on Zoom. If you raise your hand, we will recognize you by name, and our handy IT guy, Dave Morton, will unmute you. So feel free to raise your hand and we will work through questions. Dave, are you able to see the folks who are raising their hands?
Yes, I am. I don't see anybody yet. If you go to your, oh, yep, we got a couple here. Can you see the names, Emily?
I do not.
We have Bill. I'm going to allow Bill to talk.
Okay.
Go ahead, Bill. Bill, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, I let you unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, good. So my question is about, I have several, but let's start with the environmental assessment. There are different kinds of levels of environmental assessments, and I'd like to maybe get a more detailed description of what you're looking for in your type of environmental assessment.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for that good question. This is not an area on which I am an expert, but my understanding on the site assessment is that it's land type driven, and so I believe that there are certain ASTM standards based on different land types, and I believe there is one for forest and open land, others for structures and dwellings. So it just depends on what features are on your land, and then what they encounter when they're on the land, what gets included in the report if they find issues of concern that need to be addressed. I'm happy to look into that more with you following this workshop.
You would, thank you.
All right, I have the list up, and I'm not of participants, and I'm not seeing questions, so that means everyone's asleep, or folks need more pictures of my dogs, or we've done an incredible job. Oh, all right. Bill was being polite and letting other folks step up.
Yes, I was trying to do that, but it didn't work. So I guess, again, in conservation easements, there are lots of types and levels of conservation easements. Maybe you have a prototype or a example or sample that all of us could sort of get our brain around. So that's one thing. Another question I have, I guess, is as we're working on these applications and we send them in, will you then, in other words, in my case, for example, I'd like to know when the application is complete, when I've got enough stuff in it. Obviously, I could keep adding and adding over time, but can we get informed at least about that much on the application when you consider it complete?
Sure. To speak to the first question about conservation easements and what a Forest Corps Fund conservation easement would look like, there should be an example of an easement or an easement template that's linked from our website. If it's not within the grant manual, I know it should be linked from the website. It's pretty, what we would imagine for this grant round, since we're requiring public access, is pretty bare bones on the restrictions, except for the forest protection should the land be forested. So I can work with you on that if that template is not available already. To speak to the completeness of the application, there is a checklist as the final page of the application for the applicant to use to to help them as a guide for completion that goes through both required and requested to help you know what you need to turn in terms of me telling you that it's complete, I think my assumption would be when you tell me it's done, I'll think it's done. If I find something missing after the fact, I would request it. But my hope would be that you would be able to complete it following that list.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, well, we can give everyone another minute or two to think if they have questions. Otherwise, I'll assume that you have what you need to get going, that you're excited to put forward proposals, and you've got my contact information on the screen to reach me directly. And again, there's other regional VOF staff who would be happy to help you bring projects forward. So please don't hesitate to be in touch. I hate it that we're not in person. I hate it that I'm not down there visiting with you guys and getting out on the land and seeing these areas. But I know you're all doing great work, and we're so excited and to help support it. All right, I see a new question coming in from Liz Belcher. It looks like she might be muted, right? Okay, perfect. Liz?
Hi, Emily. I thought you did a great job. My question is, if you have a property that is already in public ownership, but your project is really focusing on invasive species control and improving public access to the property, does that qualify if you're not actually acquiring the property because it's already in public ownership?
Yes, that would qualify. You don't have to purchase the land for it to be eligible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good question.
All right, I'm chatting. So good. So, as you know, our interest is in Franklin County anyway, is on we'll call it a river access project that liquid trail through the forest. But so you and I have been back and forth on this, and I think my basic question is, we now are looking at another project that is very, very similar, amazingly similar. And I guess I hate to start on that project without, I guess, have a good feeling that that type of project is feasible and, reasonable and acceptable to VOF. Because of a lot of the application is forever long, of course. So we're looking at another one, and we just sort of found out about that. So as far as the type of project, I'd like to know if that type of project that we've already sent you some basic information on, if that is acceptable. And
Hi, Bill. Thanks for that question. I think you're feeling the pains of having a new and more open, creative, flexible program, in that the guidelines aren't quite as clear to know, am I in or am I out? I love the idea of the river access. I love it that it's forested. I love the story of the river being the trail through the woods and a way to get that people experience and learn about forest. I love that and think it's a great narrative. It's an eligible project proposal, certainly, in concept. Can I say that that's going to be a funded project? I cannot. I don't, a lot of what gets funded is going to depend on what else gets submitted. So if someone else, if we have an avalanche of incredible proposals, the river access, would need to compete against those to get the funding. But in concept and in the story and in the framework you've come up with, I think it's great. I know that's a wishy-washy answer. I think it's the best I can give.
I understand it's a wishy-washy business.
All right, I see a question from Renee.
Hey, Emily. I just have a quick question as someone who's applying as a part of a larger locality. Can we have multiple applications from the same locality?
Definitely. We have seen that in the past, and you're welcome to put in as many applications as you have projects.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. All right, everyone, I would say if you've got questions, maybe we'll go ahead and end the question and answer section. I will follow up with an email to all of you once I have posted this presentation, either as a recording or as a PDF. I will double check and make sure there's a template easement available online as well. And I will try to capture these questions and flesh out my answers to also have those available to you on the website. And I will send out a notification that that material is present at that time. Again, you've got my email, ewhite@vof.org. You've got my number, 434-282-7054. I think by signing up for this webinar, you've probably joined my email list. So I don't send out updates very often, but I have your contact information and I have you also from registering. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your interest in the program, and I really look forward to seeing the proposals and your ideas come forward. So thank you so much, and I think we can sign off. I'll go ahead and end the webinar with, as long as I have Dave's blessing to do so. Dave, are we good to go?
We're all set. I'll go ahead.
All right, all right, thanks everyone. Have a great afternoon. Enjoy the long weekend. I hope you have the opportunity to get outside, and I hope everyone is staying healthy in all regards. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.